Finally here, time to power the Unicell. We're talking about wiring, power systems, all that fun stuff. But first, very quick announcement.
We are going to be putting the Unicell up for sale. Originally, we were hoping that we could move into this build and sell our own bus. However, that is just not in the cards for us right now. We have the opportunity to do one of our dream projects in 2023. So we are going to take that chance next year. So when this build is done, it will go up for sale and it will be done before the build series is finished.
We don't have any more detailed information about it right now, but if you're interested in the sale, we'll have some links in the description below, and that will get you everything you need to know when it's time to go through that process.
The Unicell is going to a brand new owner, and we cannot wait to find out who that will be.
Ride across this country into the starlight, 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
This is episode 16, All Things Power. If you know anything about our build style, you know that I do not do a single part of the power system. It is 110% Drew, and I'm gonna get my head nodding ready because this is the most Drew-centric episode of the entire build series.
Up until this point, we really haven't mentioned much of anything to do with the power or the wiring, but I have been doing it as we go. So I've been installing parts as we continue to build. We just wanted to put it all in one episode to sort of explain it instead of a little bit here and a little bit there.
We're gonna go back in time a little bit in this episode to show you what has been happening behind the scenes with this power system that's been continually progressing all along.
To start off, let's get into the basics of this system before we really get into any detailed aspects of it. First off, it is a 24 volt system, which basically means we have a 24 volt battery pack. Now that battery pack is 560 amp hours lithium iron phosphate, and we also have 1200 watts of solar, which is 3 400 watt solar panels on the roof. Now, there's many details in the system. There's lots of vocabulary and it can get confusing, but simply put, in terms of usable power, we have a DC or direct current side and an AC alternating current side. Your DC side will be 12 volt appliances, lights, that sort of thing that you hardwire in, whereas the AC or alternating current side of the system is going to be powering your outlets. They're going to be like a standard outlet you would have in a house, so you can plug in any sort of appliance or any sort of normal thing you would use in a household setting. Let's first just do a quick rundown of the whole power system from the top to the bottom. Starting on the roof, we have our 3 400 watt 24 volt solar panels. Those are wired in parallel. 3 sets of wires go to these 3-to-1 converters that will send out a single positive and a single negative. That is 8 gauge wire. From the roof, the 8 gauge wires will go into a circuit breaker. From the circuit breaker, they then lead into the solar charge controller side of our all-in-one solar inverter charger. It can be a little confusing to explain this. Often these are parted out in the system, so you will have a solar charge controller, an inverter, and a charger for shore power. So I'm going to talk about this as if it's parted out, and we'll sort of explain the all-in-one as we go. From our solar charge controller, we will now send power across to our links distribution. From the links distribution, you'll see the main positive and negative wires that lead back to the battery pack. On the positive side, that is fused with an A&L fuse to protect there. And the negative side, you'll see it's going through our BMS, which manages all the cells in the battery. Now with the ability to pull power from the batteries, we can start distributing power to different legs of the system. So off of the Lynx distribution, we can now send power over to the inverter. The inverter will take that 24 volts and invert it up to an AC current. That AC can now be sent to the AC side of your distribution panel. From there, you have your individual circuits and circuit breakers that send out to each set of outlets you decide to install. Back at our Lynx distribution, we can now send power to the DC side of our distribution panel, which will eventually send power to lights and things like that. First though, we need to convert that from the 24 volt that the battery pack is down to 12 volt, so we have a usable voltage for all of our DC appliances. So you'll see the wires coming from the Lynx into a 24 to 12 volt converter, comes in 24 volts, comes out 12 volts, and then that is wired directly in to the DC side of our distribution panel. We now have 12 volt power on the DC side of our distribution panel. There's a whole bunch of slots available to run here. You'll have to fuse appropriately, but each of these can send out to lights and switches and anything that is a DC appliance that is hardwired into your system. Back at our all-in-one, we're going to talk about the charger part of the solar inverter charger. So first, we were going to accept shore power. So we have wires that come out and lead to an outlet that is mounted on the outside of the Unicell. This is a 30 amp outlet, so we can either take a 30 amp plug or you can convert it down to a normal 15 or 20 and plug into like a residential outlet. So now you're capable of taking shore power to send it in. It will go back into the all-in-one to the charger portion. It converts that current to then send current back over to the Lynx and back into the battery pack. So now you're able to charge your batteries off of shore power. Back at our solar inverter charger all-in-one unit, we have our ground. We're going to take the ground, send it back across to our Lynx distribution. So from our Lynx distribution, we will send a ground wire through the floor into the chassis of the vehicle. You will see we still have a couple spaces available on our Lynx distribution. We'll be using one of those spots to power the 24 volt AC. So instead of wiring that AC into any other part of the system, you're essentially wiring it directly to the battery. We still have one spot available on that Lynx distribution. If the new owner of the vehicle wanted to add some other sort of 24 volt appliance in the future, there's a spot right there. It would make it very easy to install. Using that all-in-one solar inverter charger, we actually needed less spots than if we had each of those pieces parted out. One last addition, I added a positive and negative bus bar just before the 24 to 12 volt converter, so I could access 24 volt on that side of the booth. Mostly I did this for our converted water heater that we converted from a 110 volt to a 24 volt heating element. I could have run the wires all the way from the water heating element to the Lynx distribution, but I already had these bus bars and 12 gauge wire on hand, which was the size I needed to run it from that point. If I were to run the wires from the water heater all the way back to the Lynx, I would have needed to go up to a much larger wire.
That is an overview of the full system, top to bottom, so now we can dig in a little bit more into depth into each individual component.
In episode 7, we installed the solar panels, but at the time could not find my solar crimper and couldn't find one readily available, so we had to wait about a month for that to come in. It finally came in. We installed the crimps for the MC4 connectors, and we're able to finally connect the wires to the panels and bring them into the system.
And be responsible. It's my heart, so I hold you accountable, so grow up. It's cheating season, for God knows reason. Stop making up excuses when I simply don't care.
Because you're running the wires from the exterior to interior of the Unicell, of course it needs an entry gland, and we sealed all of that up with some lap sealant on the roof.
Also in episode 7, you saw we installed our ceiling, which means we had to prepare for our puck lights and our vent fans. We ran the wires for each of those, the puck lights being a very low watt draw. We only needed to use a small 16 gauge wire. And for our vent fans, given the distance in this build, we are able to use 14 gauge wire. In the description below, we will link all the wires we are using. This is stranded marine insulated wire. This stuff is really good. It basically is going to last forever.
The thing about running wires in one of these builds is that it's pretty difficult to do it before any of your major cabinet or furniture pieces are in place, because we're running the wires behind all the furniture, not behind the walls like in a standard house build. So we really had to take a pause on some of the electrical while I finished making the kitchen cabinet, the booth, the bed frame, and once those things were in place, Drew could go in and run the wires all along the back and inside of each of those pieces.
A big time saver that I found in doing this kind of build is prepping your wires. So once you know where outlets are going to be or switches, all of those are going to be located. You go in with your measuring tape, measure the distance along the wall, back over to where your distribution will be, and then you prep all those wires, you figure out the gauges, and you cut them all accordingly. So when you get to that step in the build, oh, I'm at the kitchen rocker panel, I can just pull from this stack of wires, and there it is. It's ready to go. I don't have to then prep it at that point. It's just already sitting there waiting for me.
I don't wanna come across impolite, but I'm ready. Hey, baby, come and show me how it's done. It's just you and me, one-on-one, nice and dirty. Late nights on the sofa, watching a soap opera. I feel your hands on my body. Wish we were getting naughty. Oh, I'm just getting started. Thinking about how you feel so right. Been dreaming all night. Could you be mine? We can go up. Or we can go down. Left or right, do or die. Come on, don't be shy. We can go up. Or we can go down. Left or right.
Once each piece of furniture was installed into the build, I could now install the outlets or the switches. So we installed all of our AC outlets, all of our DC switches for lights and things like that. Of course, all the AC and DC will be running back to the same distribution panel. So this is pretty easy as far as length. If you need an AC one from the kitchen to there, the DC one's going to be the same.
The things you're doing to me, it's like something out of a movie. You see right through me. It's like you already do me. We can go up, or we can go down. Left or right, do or die. Come on, don't be shy. We can go up, or we can go down. Left or right, do or die. Come on, don't be shy. Baby, come and be with me tonight.
A really nice upgrade that I finally did on this build that I should have done a long time ago. I invested in the Wago wire connectors. So these are lever nuts that replace wire nuts. These Wagos are really amazing. They're super easy to use, and there's nothing wrong with using wire nuts. Given they're slightly more expensive in a build this size, they're just still ideal. That's such a minimal cost. I wish I would have got them a couple years ago. There's just such a low rate of installation failure with these because you can see what you're doing. They're clear, you can see right through, you can see that you've stripped the wire appropriately, you can see it's connecting, and you just clamp them down and they're done. If you make a mistake or want to change something, you just unclamp them, pull the wire out, change it over. It's that easy. I don't think I'm ever going back to wire nuts. A couple spots where I particularly liked using the Wagos were stringing the overhead lights together. So when I'm bringing each set of wires back, I didn't have to do multiple connections. I just brought them all back to one of the 5-to-1s, brought the power in from the switch on one of the slots, and then put each of the sets of wire into that one 5-to-1 Wago clip. It's just clean and it's simple. I also really liked using the 5-to-1s on those rocker switches that have 5 because all of the negatives need to be contained under one wire nut essentially. So this is just an easier, cleaner way to do that. Point is, I really liked using these. I highly recommend them, especially if you're a beginner. They're super easy to use. Now go ahead and comment below that they're actually called Wagos and let me know if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm not going to get too crazy on wire sizing, but it is something you have to pay attention to. Definitely do the math. There's a lot of nice calculators online that you can use. As I mentioned, for our situation, those puck lights, we were able to use 16 gauge, the fans 14. This is only 12 volts, so if you have a higher voltage, you don't need as large of a wire. Point is, you got to pay attention to this stuff. This is where a lot of people make mistakes. It's pretty easy to, so definitely double check all of your lengths of wire, amps being pulled, the voltage, and what gauge you need that corresponds with that. As far as the AC side of the system, wire size for that is pretty simple, pretty standard, 12-3. It's not common that you would need something any larger than that. That being said, if you have some very special appliance, definitely pay attention to what you're doing. In addition to sizing the wires, you're going to need to make sure they're all fused appropriately. You definitely want to make sure the fuses are sized appropriately for each use. The fuses are what protect the wires and save them from pushing too much power, which could heat up and cause a fire. Even if you're to copy a very reputable plan, very good to double check the math yourself afterwards before you actually turn anything on.
Once all the outlets and switches were wired on the inside of the Unicell, it was time to move to the outside. We have 2 exterior lights on this build. One is above the Wildlands door on the side, and the other one is above the big barn doors right in the back. When you're out camping on BLM land, out in the wilderness, and it is super dark, it's really nice to be able to just switch on one of those exterior lights and be able to see what you're doing. We added 2 exterior GFCI outlets with external covers right on the back of the vehicle below those big barn doors. So now you can set up a table, work outside, plug in a speaker, whatever you need to do out there. Now you have power right on the outside of the vehicle.
But what if someone steals my power?
We thought of that.
Oh, we did?
We did.
Oh, good. What did we do? I'm kidding. Of course, we put that on its own circuit so you can simply flip the breaker and shut that outlet off, turn it on when you need it. Otherwise, you might wake up to orange extension cord plugged in the back of your rig, going over to some van or tent running an AC. Like, I got no power. You guys been running this AC all night. Next, we installed our distribution box. In order to do this, we cut a hole in the front of the booth and placed the box in, screwed it down. On the back side of this, you'll see we're installing our 24 to 12 volt converter, so we can take the 24 volt current and send 12 volt into the distribution on the DC side. Once all the wires are run and brought back to your distribution box, you then have the time-consuming process of putting each wire into each spot. So each circuit breaker on the AC side and each slot on your DC side. This being stranded wire, it can get a little messy just trying to put those wires into the location. Using ferrules makes this process a lot easier. Once you've crimped that on, it's more like working with the end of a solid wire as opposed to a bunch of small wires that are in the stranded wire. Next up, I dusted the old gold fingers off from the 12 plus decades of woodworking experience and built the most basic platform ever.
You did woodworking yourself.
I did. So I built a platform here to support the Sun Gold Power all-in-one as well as the circuit breaker. So I was able to mount both of those off of the floor, which leaves that space under there available for something else, as well as space to run the wires. Overall, I really liked using this all-in-one unit. The first thing I liked about this all-in-one unit was it saves a lot of space. By combining all of these pieces into one box, it's actually a lot more concise than installing the 3 things separate and having to wire them together. So I like that. It looks nicer and it saves a lot of space. Second is it actually saves you some money. So if you buy a charge controller, an inverter, and a charger separately, it costs more than buying one of these all-in-one units. The one thing I don't love about these units is they have a little bit of a higher idle watt draw than if you had each individual component. But if you have a larger power system and space is at a premium, this might be the route to go for you. So you really have to weigh the options here to make the best decision for you. The larger your system gets, the less of an issue something like that's going to really be. If you have a really large battery bank and solar array, losing 40 watts every hour is probably not a huge deal. But in general, we are always trying to keep things as low as we can. We then used the ground on the all-in-one box and ran the wire from that to the links distribution, and then ran a wire from links through the floor to the chassis to ground the whole system. Next up, let's quickly talk about the battery and the battery selection for this build. This can be a long conversation, but simply put, we decided to build this battery from cells. So we got these 280 amp hour EVE cells from Doken Power. These were US stock, so they shipped here very fast, and I was able to assemble the battery. There's a lot of advantage to building a battery yourself from cells. They really let you customize to the space you have available, and you can build the capacity and the voltage battery you want. So these are 3-volt cells, and you can put them in series to reach the voltage you want. Another big advantage is it's more affordable to build from cells. For example, if you were to spend, say, I don't know, $1,000 on a name brand pre-built lithium pack, you're going to get about 100 amp hours. If you build from cells, depending on your supplier, you probably could get between 400 to 600 amp hours for that same price. Now there is a learning curve and you have to figure all that out. It's not super beginner friendly, but it isn't the most overwhelming thing if you take your time and learn how to do it. Once the cells came in the mail, I was pretty excited to open these up and check them out.
Pretty excited. You were super excited.
I was really excited. These are big cells and they look great out of the box. Once we had the cells organized and connected in series, we connected them to our Overkill BMS. This BMS is really nice. So a BMS is basically a battery management system. It manages all the cells, it keeps them balanced. This Overkill BMS was super easy to use, and I really like that in addition to it being a BMS, it also has a shunt built right in. The shunt is going to be basically reading the resistance, which allows you to read how much power you are taking from the batteries or how much power is coming in. This BMS connects to Bluetooth, so you can get the app on your phone or an iPad, and you can see the voltage of all the cells. You can see the balancing in action. The really nice thing is you can see exactly what is coming in power-wise, what you're using. It'll actually show you the difference in watts. So if you're using 100 watts, but you're receiving 200, it'll show you you're charging still at 100 watts. You can also disengage the charge or discharge via the app, which is really cool. Other than just physically turning that big switch, you can do it right on the app, which I think is a really cool feature. With the batteries in place, we built a shelf above it to accommodate the links distribution, as well as the BMS and the main on and off, and the fuse that protects that first main positive wire. The BMS is mounted up there. You'll see it has 2 leads on each side. I didn't really love the idea of doubling up the negative lead onto the battery terminal. So what I did here was added a couple bus bars, so then I can just run one bigger wire from the bus bar. So I only have one main cable connected to my negative terminal on my battery pack. One aspect of the system I haven't got to installing yet, I will be putting plexiglass over all this stuff just to protect it from dust or if anyone potentially spills a drink or something, so it's not fully exposed. It's always a good idea to kind of protect all of these components, but particularly being located underneath the couch where you hang out and you eat and you drink and things like that. We wanted to do another layer of protection just so if something was spilled, it's not going to get directly to any of the components. With all these pieces in place, it was time to connect the batteries to the links, which will connect to the whole system. We ran our main positive and our main negative from the batteries to the links distribution. Now there's power in the links, and we can send out to each individual leg of the system from there. It was finally the moment to turn the system on for the first time. But first, check all your connections. And what you have, it's the moment of truth. Do we have lights or do we have sparks? We've been running all of our lights off this temporary setup I had with this other battery pack. So I just had that wired into the distribution side, the DC side. I'm going to be disconnecting that, so we're going to lose all of our lights for a second. I'm going to put the actual wires from the 24 to 12 volt converter in, and that's all wired back to our main distribution. Battery's hooked up. At that point I'll also have to turn this on, and it should be sending power over. So it's going to get dark in here for a second, but then hopefully our real power will be back. And oh yeah, it's dark. Alright, we're going to turn the switch on. Here's to hoping we get lights and not sparks. Let's see. Oh, we've got lights.
Hey!
We got lights. All in one has to be turned on. Okay. Wow. That was good. Don't be alarmed by the beep. Okay, it's getting voltage. We are just mostly getting the DC side up and running today. We have lights on our actual battery pack now. And we're going to check out the BMS to see if we are actually using some power. So I can see that we're pulling 109 watts or 4.14 amps. As I turn this down, you will see that discharge number go down to 3.7 amps. 3.61. We turn all the lights off, we can see exactly what this takes by itself. We shut everything else off. Go way down.
Oh yeah, 2.4.
Yep. We can see what the self-consumption of the all-in-one is.
Another piece of this system for us to tackle was installing the shore power. To do this, it involves another hole in the side of the vehicle, but once you drill that hole, the power inlet goes in place. You wire it back to the all-in-one, screw it in place. It's time to plug it in and see if the shore power is working.
And we plugged it in, and nothing.
Nothing at all.
I'm like, huh, this is weird. Turns out the outlet I was plugged into just did not work. The one above it worked, but the one below it did not.
Yep.
I'm like, what is going on? I'm racking my brain. I'm looking for the book to like try to read if I can engage something. And I changed outlets and I'm like, oh, there's the light on the shore power plug. Sure enough, once I was in a working outlet, it fired right up, and you can see on the BMS we were taking in 40 amps of charge. All right, it's blinking charge. I don't hear any fans kicking on. Let me see what the BMS says. Here it goes. Fans are kicking on. Fans are kicking on.
Is it working?
Woo! 1,000 watts!
It's
38
working?
amps! Charge them batteries! We're good. We are powering up. Pushing over 1,000 watts. 38, 39 amps right now. And it's working.
High five, that's amazing.
Yes.
So good.
With everything finally wired and connected, it was time to test each part of it. First thing was turning that big switch on, and do the lights come on or do we have sparks?
We went through and checked all the dimmer switches for the puck lights. The bed area is on a separate switch from the main house lights. We also have a bathroom light. We also checked that all the outlets were working. We have the DC 12 volt USB outlets, and we also have the regular AC outlets like you would see in a house.
Good.
Good work.
Good. Hot. You want to know how to drain your batteries real fast? Just fire up a heat gun for a while.
We made sure that the vent fans were working properly, and we also installed all of our strip lights. We have strip lights underneath most cabinets and shelves that are overhead, and we also have strip lights underneath the bed, in the closet at the end of the bed, and in the overhead cabinet in the front. You almost cannot overdo it on lights. It's so nice to just have a choice of what you're going to turn on, and also to be able to see in the back of your cabinets.
Two of the last things I actually wired in place were the water heater and the water pump. So once those were wired, flip the switches, make sure they're working, and we are good to go.
The final thing to check in the system was the refrigerator. This is a chest freezer that we convert to a refrigerator, and we use an Inkbird external temperature monitoring system to do that. Because all the drawer and drawer faces were finally finished, we could secure the fridge into its drawer, plug it into the Inkbird, plug the Inkbird into the outlet that is behind the fridge compartment, turn everything on, make sure the probe is inside of the fridge, and just make sure that it's regulating its temperature properly.
One more point with building this battery bank from cells. I need to capacity test and then balance all the cells together. And I'll talk about that more in another video because it's pretty information heavy and not super important to what we're talking about today.
The power system is up and running, everything is connected, all the components have been chosen. One of our biggest goals, and the entire reason that we are building these buses and the Unicell, is for off-grid use. We love to be out in the wilderness, out on BLM land, and camping in remote places. So this entire build, and especially the power system, is designed specifically to be off-grid.
Yeah, this is probably the most exciting part of the build for me, to see this all come together. Since the first time I put a couple 100-watt solar panels on our van, put a battery together, it's been just fascinating to me. And each system is more exciting the more I learn and the more I expand it. And now you have a mobile power system that can generate its own power. Pretty much you have endless power as long as you have sunshine. Let's face it, most of us want to follow the good weather anyways. So if you have an off-grid build like this and you can follow the sunshine, you're good on power and you can run whatever you want.
This is an episode that we know so many of you have been waiting for. This is definitely the episode that Drew was waiting for, and we were so excited to just show you what he designed and the power system for this Unicell. Everything that we talked about, all the links, the components, all the parts and pieces and calculators, we're gonna link them all in the description below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time.
Later.